Hello.
Hey.
It's been a while, but still this is episode number 37 of a great podcast called Biweekly. And the host is still there. They're still the same. It is me, Dima Malenko, and on the other end of the line,
I'm Slava. Nice seeing you again.
Cool. It's been a while. We probably get into some reasons why in this episode, but still, nonetheless, we still have bits of follow-up. Those who have been with us for a long time would remember that the previous episode we discussed, it was a book club episode, and we discussed how big things are done, and I guess expressed some criticism about the book and some of the facts and how they were portrayed there. But I wanted to reemphasize that, please don't get me wrong. I think like a lot of the ideas presented in the book are great and valuable and useful. We may debate over certain details of how those ideas were presented or supported in the book, but that should not take from the ideas themselves. That's number one. And number two, also related to this book, I'm not sure if we discussed this specifically in our podcast, but one of the bigger examples that the author of How Big Things Are Done used was a writer by name of Robert Caro, I think, who created a biography of Robert Moses, very famous New York kind of politician and power figure, and that book is called Power Broker. It is very detailed and elaborate account of how about the power that Robert Moses came to exert over the entire New York and kind of New York City and New York State. And this book is considered one of the kind of greatest biographies of all time and stuff like that. Even though in the book it was portrayed like a project sort of failure because it was way over budget and over schedule and stuff like that. But long and windy, you may know podcast 99% Invisible. And they have an ongoing series discussing that particular book. And I think they read through maybe half of the book already. They have 4 episodes, I want to say. Each episode is like 2 hours. And they still ongoing. So that's great book, great discussion of the book. And never ever in the discussions of that book they mentioned the fact that it was over budget and it was it's overrun the schedule, including in the little interview they did with the author himself. So just wanted to point that out, that result might overshadow the path to how we get to that result.
It might have been too long since you've been a project manager. The budgets, the deadlines, the estimates, and they do matter for project managers a bit more than for users.
Right, but then that not to sound like a broken record, like if you hit the budget and everything else but produced something useless, like what's the point?
Fair enough.
Trade-offs are real, but we are here not to discuss trade-offs. We are here to discuss something else. And what's the topic for today?
Today we are going to discuss another podcast.
Wow,
and it's not going to be just a podcast, it's going to be my podcast. I happened to launch a podcast named STRATsphere, and we are 5 episodes deep already, with season 1 scheduled for 12 episodes. And I wanted to spend some time with you elaborating on the differences between Biweekly, STRATsphere, and the difference in the experiences and the formats and many things that I couldn't really understand from your side as you were mentioning them, because you basically not only have been a co-host of Biweekly, but also a producer. And I've never been a producer of a podcast, so this is my first time experience. And it seems really interesting. So
cool. Yeah, that's Great. Before we jump into that, we'll definitely have links to where you can listen to that podcast. Maybe can you describe what this podcast is about so that people can just jump in and so hit subscribe and like whatever they need to do to keep listening to your new podcast?
So basically, it's a Ukrainian speaking show, just to clarify, and it's dedicated to different areas of strategy. I've been doing strategic sessions for a few years, and for the past year, it got really intensive. I think Ukrainian businesses are in dire need of strategy right now. And we wanted to popularize some of the aspects. So the basic concept is to go with practitioners, like people who run businesses and use strategy as a tool, and facilitators, moderators, and consultants who help design strategies to show it from different sides and aspects.
Cool. Sounds like a very interesting and timely and important topic.
And our assistant named GPT suggested a number of points for us to discuss. I'm not sure we should go through all of them. But
I wanted to ask you, if was this thing generated by ChatGPT? Turns out it was. Okay, yeah, let's go through that. I feel like I'm being manipulated or bossed around by robot now, but I guess that's beside the point.
CTOs, you never know.
Yeah, that's right.
So I like the structure. I'm not sure we should go through all the questions, but the overall idea to compare content and structure, the way we deal with audience versus STRATsphere, and production things, because I haven't been doing much of that. And you know much more, so it would be interesting to compare the experiences now, and some our success metrics and personal growth areas, because it's also a bit different.
Cool. Let's go through that.
So, content. I think Biweekly has gone through a number of periods as we were looking for specific themes and topics and areas to discuss. Initially, we launched as something discuss English learning, and then later evolved into soft skills, and then later into management, and then later into something I would name lifestyle, because we basically compare our jobs, our lives, our books, and pretty much everything. It's still more professional than personal, but still not specifically dedicated to an area like engineering or learning or management.
Right, it's like a more professional lifestyle. Right?
Yep.
Kind of a thing.
And with STRATsphere, it was very straightforward because, well, you can probably say by the name that it has a very specific domain, and picking topics is way easier. And I don't think it's that show that could last for 200 episodes like Biweekly.
Interesting.
Like, I think by design, such things have the limit because there is a number of issues you can discuss. Of course, you could rediscuss them and then rediscuss them and then go deeper. But overall, my estimate is that this is a 50-episode podcast total. But we will go by iterations. So 12 episodes is the first season, and then we'll see how it goes and how it's perceived.
Well, this is interesting. I think that this is something that would set apart the STRATsphere podcast from what we are doing, because I think even when we started, at least I envisioned this as more of a kind of a regular ongoing thing, and therefore the choice of topics and maybe structure was sort of dictated by that to an extent. Whereas if you have a very, so to say, fixed set of things you plan to go through, I think it requires a slightly different approach, slightly different mindset, slightly different structures. And I think when you said that the name of the podcast kind of implies the topics for that, I would not quite agree with that, because I think that there are multiple dimensions to everything, including strategy. And thus far, I think you've been discussing with your guests approaches and practices and maybe experiences of developing strategies for companies. But then I guess it doesn't have to be in principle. I'm not saying that your podcast is going to do that or that you should do that. It can be also looking at like implementation of the strategy or analyzing like strategic failures of companies and stuff like that, which may become an evergreen topic, but the dynamics there is different, I think.
One thing I've never seen is a podcast with random guests. I mean, not random, but specially selected guests that goes very deep into the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the shows that invite guests, what's the recent examples? Focused. Like they do invite guests like every few episodes. And I think that they just discuss the tops, like the top expertise, the latest piece of news, something. But I think it's only shows like Biweekly that can dig deeper because like we've been discussing feedback for 6 episodes. We've been doing themes for 12 episodes. We've been discussing what a manager should and shouldn't do for 100 something episodes, which is weird because right now is episode 37, which kind of neglects the previous Another Language season.
It's interesting. I think it kind of is possible to do that in different ways. When you said that there are no, I think that there are some podcasts that go deep with random guests, but an example that came to me is something macroeconomic musings, and I'm asking myself, do I think that they go deep because just this such a narrow topic, and it, to me as an outsider, it feels like they go deep because some of the things and language they use are like way above my head, and maybe for a professional in that space, it would say, yeah, they're just briefly touching the surface of the matter. That's interesting.
Well, but based on what I can see for an hour episode, it still takes 15 minutes for the introduction and getting into it. Then you basically have something like 40 minutes to get into something. And based on my experience, you can get into something serious for 40 minutes. Like if you have round 2 and then round 3 and then round 4, you can deep dive, you can follow up, you can do some extra research. And if it's not, it kind of reminds me of focused episodes when they invite some authors of the books and they basically advertise or describe some of the freshest concepts or the newest ideas that they were working on. And then there is the next step, like go and read my book. That's how it's usually done.
I think for every podcast, what is important and what sort of defines it as a kind of every podcast is a series, or like most podcasts are a series. And I think what defines them, at least to me in my mind, is the continuity and something that goes in from one episode to another to another to another, and those can be very, very different things. It can be a topic like we always discuss, like strategy or working on the strategy. This might be a continuity that connects all of the episodes. It can be something else. If a podcast follows my I guess favorite definition of a podcast of two dudes or two persons talking, is just those two persons, that they're characters that kind of travel from one episode to another and this is what hooks you. In some other situations it might be something else entirely. Maybe it's like a format, like with soft skills engineering, it's like question and answer kind of a thing, and that understanding what is this bit of continuity that connects all of the episodes and kind of doubling down on that, I think is very critical for success. And sometimes it can be that you start thinking that continuity is X, but then turns out that it's something different. It might have been topic, but then it can grow into the host being that thing, his particular take on the topic, which he then explores and probes and tries with maybe different guests who try to persuade him otherwise, or something like that.
Well, that's fair. In my understanding, it's not just about the continuity between the episodes, because if you listen to Biweekly, not every episode is like the previous one. Yes, there are some similarities, like we do the follow-ups, and that's basically it, because for different types of episodes, there are different types of structures.
Right.
And if it's a book club, it's a specific structure. If it's an episode designed around your or mine areas, then we talk about definition, sexuality, and some other things which are specifically dedicated to this episode. Yes, there are definitions in every episode, but then they're very different depending on the topic. And I think with the guests, it's even harder. Unless you are an interviewer. If you're an interviewer, you're very much in control. But if you would like to have a conversation, conversations are really hard to manage. And even Biweekly guest episodes highlight that a lot, that they really depend on the personality and the type of person you invite as a guest.
Catching that chemistry is difficult. It takes time. Like you said, like if you start with a guest, 10-15 minutes would go just into ice breaking kind of thing, and there is, by and large, there is no way around that, right? You either do that before the podcast or you do it right there, but that is time that needs to be spent, and it's definitely a challenging position to be running a podcast like that. I wonder, there I would want to ask you, I think the episodes that you put out are around an hour long or something like that?
An hour plus, like up to 90 minutes.
Give or take. Is this the actual runtime? Because I know that some podcasts of similar kind, what they might be doing is they record two hours, but then edit down to an hour, something like this.
Currently, all of them are pretty much original. We cut just the minor noises and edited some specific phrases, but not the blocks. I consider doing them longer, but I think we will lose the part of the audience, because getting into 2-hour episodes is an investment these days, and they should be really well crafted and well designed to keep people listening.
Well, I expecting it was like record 2 hours, but then edited down to 1 hour. But that is a lot of work. I think in some early days of Biweekly, I was toying with an idea of doing something like that. But this is so difficult. You have to record with that kind of in mind, and then the post production takes ages to pull it off.
Well, since we've touched the topic of production, then could you share with our listeners what Biweekly production looks like?
It looks like a dude on his computer, moving mouse and kind of typing, pressing keys on the keyboard. I think to be a little bit more serious now, I think we record separate audio and video tracks for when
I think maybe we should start with the prep, because it would be fair to say that we have sync ups before the recordings where we discuss the topics, what they should be like. Then we run Notion notes and we fill in the notes. And then we hop into...
That's exactly right. The prep part is important. This is largely invisible to people, and it's not like we create a script we go through, but just things that might be useful for us when we go into discussing the topic, the definitions, the questions that might be interesting, and then stuff like that. A lot of time goes there. Then we do record with separate audio video tracks. Then I get audio tracks and edit them in Apple's Logic Pro to align, maybe tune the sound, not sound quality, but just adjust the sound to make sure it's kind of equal, like those levels kind of thing, and edit minor things, minor glitches in the audio, like ums and ums and unwanted or unnecessary pauses that might be caused by the recording, and then I produce audio, like edited audio track, and we send it to our video editor, who creates a video for YouTube based on the video recordings on either end and the final audio track. And then I do notes for the podcast and publish it where we publish the podcast.
And where do we publish the podcast?
We publish everywhere where you can find podcasts. Like, most of all, you can find everything on all the materials and especially notes on our site, biweeklycast.com. But then pretty much every podcast player should carry our podcast. Technically, we currently hosting this with Spotify, or like whatever current name for the podcast thing is. That they've been changing stuff around a little bit lately. Yep, but that's it.
But then it integrates into Apple Podcasts.
And from there
networks.
it propagates to it gets to Apple Podcast database, and pretty much every podcast player uses that as one, if not the source of truth, but one of the sources of truth for podcast listings and episodes.
That's curious, because I think for STRATsphere it's not that straightforward, because I believe in Biweekly case we pretty much were always doing that remotely. And by episode 5 in STRATsphere, I've already had 2 on-site episodes in the studio, which is a very different experience. Apart from that, first 3 episodes were just Zoom recordings. We were not really playing with separate video, separate audio, and I think that was a mistake. And I should have gone into separate tracks. But I thought that we should start easy, like not to get people too intense about something, and not to overcomplicate stuff. But I believe that all the future episodes will be done with Riverside, which is software for podcasts and recording, which seems to be an optimal choice. Like, most of the podcasts I know use Riverside if they record remotely. And one of the upsides here is that it records things locally and then it uploads them to the server.
Nice.
So no matter what your speed is, both your and my lanes could be separated, saved, and then later uploaded within some time. No matter what your internet is and the computer capacity, etc.
Well, this is interesting. Yeah, I think back in the day I was looking into maybe using some of that software, but I think at that day and age I was not kind of happy with reliability of features or something. Like, I thought like, it would be more reliable if we still do it the old way we are doing it, with recording separately on our computers with audio hijack and stuff. But the downside of our setup is that both you and I, we have to be on our computers to do the recording. I cannot connect from the phone and stuff like that, which I imagine nowadays would be possible with something like Riverside. Something to keep in mind.
Moreover, my colleagues are using Riverside for another podcast. It turns out that sometimes your phone is more powerful than your laptop, and you can actually have much more production capacities there.
Yep, there you go.
I think the preparation is a bit different with guests, because I asked them to watch one of the episodes that were recorded previously, but they still go in a very different direction. We try replicating something like our notes, but again, it's not working that well because it takes time and arrangement, and I'm still struggling here. For studio episodes, I've been asking Sasha, who helps us with video editing, to assemble one of our episodes, and the other was assembled by the studio guys who were recording it. And I'm still in the process. Like, I can't really say what it's going to look like, because I will definitely have more guests remotely, and I will definitely have more guests on site. And I still don't have the perfect spot or the perfect format. Right now, Riverside is an experiment, and I'm not even sure which studio I'm going to use for the next on-site episode. So it's still a long way to go.
Since this seems to be rather big project for you for Savvy. Do you consider building your own studio for this kind of thing? Not only for podcasts, but maybe for some other materials and stuff that you might want to record or create, produce?
That is an option. I believe that for the past few months we've been discussing this, and we don't have a solution yet, like what we're going to do. Kyiv is quite okay with a number of studios you could use. They are a bit expensive, but since season 1 of STRATsphere is just 12 episodes, half of them approximately is going to be remote. So just for the 6 episodes, it doesn't make much sense. I think when we come to a decision of season 2, if it happens, then it would be a good time to start assembling something more permanent.
Interesting. Yeah, makes sense. Well, since you mentioned this, and I wanted to ask you about this. This would take us maybe a little bit outside of the topic of production and preparation, but you say the first season is planned for 12 episodes. I think there are 5 or 6 episodes out now. Is it 5 or 6?
5 out. 6 has been recorded but not published yet.
And you know that some podcasters and some of the recommendations when you start a new podcast are a pre-recorded number of episodes and then kind of start releasing them so that you can focus maybe a little bit more on promotion and marketing and stuff like that, rather than worrying about recording the next episode and not to get discouraged, but by maybe expectedly underwhelming reaction to the first episode just because this is a new thing and people did not discover that. I wonder how you went about this. Did you pre-record stuff, pre-plan stuff, or did you go with it just as it happened?
April was just crazy because we recorded 3 episodes, and then in May in April we recorded 4 episodes. One was in April and one was in May. And we basically published every week, even though we had a few episodes in stock already. But then we used all that we had, and right now we're going to publish more or less live. I'm not sure I'm going to have this issue because I have an assistant, Lera Strelchina, who helps out with all the promotion and PR activities, so I don't have to bother with that a lot, but it still takes some time and attention. I haven't really announced the podcast as a project yet. I was just announcing separate episodes. And I believe this week or next week we should just present it to the wider audience, saying what it is, what it's going to be like, what we already have, and what we are planning to do. And this is going to be probably next Wednesday. We'll see. Maybe it will go bi-weekly, maybe monthly, maybe who cares? It's about the quality.
Well, then shout out to Lera for doing important job for your podcasts, and to our listeners, follow the links in the description and hit that like, subscribe, whatever button is there to support Slava and Lera.
One of the things about the production that was very different for me when you started doing that, and that I feel now as one of the people who is responsible for the promo, is the YouTube. Like, I could never understand why you do all the hustle with extra videos and editing and stuff. Because our YouTube numbers are moderate, let's put it this way. We've been doing that for quite a while, and it was not flying high. It turns out that YouTube does promote organic content a lot. Like, for our first video, we got maybe 25% of the views from organic YouTube things. And it's impressive because I don't think Facebook or Instagram does any kind of organic traffic. Like when people see something, especially if it's published on a page, a business page, it's mostly for money. I've also heard that TikTok is similar to YouTube in this regard, that it kind of also shows something and gets people into those videos, but I'm not there yet. Like, this is a bridge too far. No TikTok for now, but maybe Lera will convince me one day.
As I've been always saying, I think the big benefit of YouTube is that it is everywhere and people understand YouTube, and you can have a YouTube link, and no matter where the person is receiving that link, even like on their fridge, that they likely will be able to click that link and start watching your video, listening to your podcast, which is not at all the same with regular podcast infrastructure. You have to have a podcast player, you have to be into that kind of thing a little bit to get going with the podcast, and that's why I think YouTube is important. And nowadays, I think people even they just do YouTube videos and they call them there. We have a podcast. Okay, whatever.
Biweekly was a true podcast for me because I think even by now we have much more listeners on podcast players than on YouTube. And STRATsphere is very different here. Like we are 10 times more on YouTube than in podcast players. And I think it's going to grow. Like YouTube will get more views and likes and submits than the podcast players. I don't like that, but that's the truth.
In the end of the day, like we discussed in the follow-up section, what matters is the result, right? If people get to listen to you, to your guests, to your ideas and interact with them, that's all that matters.
One of the things that struck me is the number of random feedback that I started getting from these videos. I think with Biweekly, we are much more personal and intimate, and we were trying doing those little chats for our listeners. Not little chats, there was something like 100 people, but still like a mini group where people could share. Then we tried going into it was discuss, I guess, mode on the site, which also didn't fly very well. But the idea was to create something where people could interact with each other.
Right.
I still don't know how to do it for either Biweekly or STRATsphere, but STRATsphere does bring a lot of random feedback, like, oh, I was watching your episode and that's my thoughts, or like, this is what I got from this, or like, just say thank you to this guy, he's very professional. For 5 episodes, we've collected something like 40 feedback pieces, which is very impressive. I think it's mostly because most of my guests have their audiences and they don't know me. So it's not like Biweekly where we were mostly communicating with people who know us. Yeah, and it was kind of hard to go to another bubble. Only when we had guest episodes, there was some flood of fresh views and unique people. And STRATsphere is very different here. It's not always constructive. Like it's really hard to manage because it's 80% emotion and 20% some actual points, but still I'm impressed.
This is how people are, but I think that this is great. This is really, I guess, encouraging. And if I may be in a position to give any sort of advice, I would suggest you kind of cherish that feedback and like look for ways to create a loop of getting sort of more of that. And as you said, like I definitely don't know how to do that properly, and would be very all ears for any ideas that you try and that work. Maybe we can try some of that for Biweekly as well.
I think in terms of Biweekly, there are lots of people who have been with us for years now, and they've been doing that silently. Like they just follow us, and every now and then they would drop a line somewhere on Facebook or somewhere else in personal things. And I believe only few people comment publicly, mostly on YouTube these days. And that's the only section where you can see public comments. But we are a bit different in terms of interaction with the audience, because back in STRATsphere, I have an option to deep in some questions, to prepare some provocations for the listeners. And I think Biweekly is more of our conversation, and we don't engage the audience that much, neither by titles nor by specific, games. We've tried that, but I think based on our personality, it's not very organic.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
You're not that kind of Instagram guy who says like, well, if you click here, if you post a plus, if you do something, it just doesn't seem authentic.
Right. That's totally true. I think you're right. This is a function of neither you nor definitely not me not being kind of a sort of a public person. Then if that's not there, then like how do you create space or room or opportunities for people to engage and provide feedback? You maybe don't.
I believe you were very successful back in Dnipro when you had a lot of public speaking around Ukraine, and it was the pre-COVID era. And this was a perfect tool for you because you could be yourself, you could do what you like, and it would bring new people every now and then to the show. Then COVID struck, and doing it remotely is a very different kind of business. I think it takes different nerve to publish things, to communicate with people differently. And then during the war, it got even different.
Even more different. Yeah, that's right. But it is what it is, right?
That's true. Speaking of target audience, do we have any idea who our listeners are?
I would have a theory. I guess you would laugh at me for that. But if we go by the definition of the podcast is like two dudes talking, then our audience is dudes and gals listening. How's that?
That's pretty descriptive.
I should be a consultant at some point, shouldn't I?
Short answer is no. Like we basically understand some basic stats like geography and the reach, but it's really hard to say. And it's totally the same with STRATsphere. Like I can only imagine by people who reach out that they are HR managers, C-level managers, and sometimes just random people who are curious about something. Like I got a few public service officials and a few people who do art who reached out. That was really surprising because I can't even guess whose audience it is because most of the guests are not in that kind of business.
That's interesting. But the question I would have around this is that I guess for our podcast, we not to say gave up, but we made at some point a conscious decision that we are doing this mostly for ourselves because we just enjoy those conversations and the process. And we, of course, immensely love when people engage with us, those listeners who write in or leave feedback. That's great. But first of all, we are doing this for ourselves. Is that any different? I would imagine that it would have to be different for STRATsphere. Is this the situation where you have a specific audience in mind and you would want to reach them? How does that work? How does that calculation go?
Let's say that the process of strategizing in a company basically engages a number of people. It engages in Ukrainian business, usually it's HRD kind of person who is looking for a facilitator or choosing a moderator for a strategic session. Then there is C-level team that comes to the strategic session itself. And then there are some senior managers who have an ambition to come there. And then business owners who consider whether they need or don't need a strategic session, how it could impact their business, etc. And at different levels, they're all kind of part of our audience, but they come with different people. Different guests bring different sides of this audience. I think that most of the conversations are beneficial for all audiences, but they will most likely listen to people who they understand. Like HR managers will probably listen to HRDs who share the experience selecting and preparing strategic session. C-level managers would listen to C-level guests who share their experience during the strategic sessions. Business owners would listen to business owners, and so on.
And do you foresee that might be for the next season you might do some sort of survey or research for the audience to inform how to structure the topics and stuff like that for the second season?
We'll see. It depends whether there is season 2, and if there is one, we'll probably do an extra research. I think it's a good idea. One of the issues is that right now there are 2 podcasts on our YouTube channel, which is SoftSphere and STRATsphere. As you can imagine, SoftSphere is about soft skills, and Anya Krasilink is doing that thing. And I believe that our subscribers would be mixed from two shows on the same channel. And it might be challenging to split those and see who is who.
Interesting.
I think we kind of got into there, but would like to remind or try to get really, really far away from our experience today, because your first podcast was also a co-hosted podcast, right?
Yes.
And it was Good Morning
India. Yes.
And then you had a solo podcast.
Yes, I did.
Which was not invented here.
Right.
So you've had like two separate podcast experiences before Biweekly? Or I believe not invented here, was in the early days of Biweekly?
Yeah, it was in early days. I think it was straight from Good Morning India to Biweekly.
I can totally say that Biweekly is by now my favorite type of conversation because a number of reasons. But if you compare your hosting experiences, I can probably assume that you like the co-hosting things more, but solo hosting is different, and it's a different type of show.
Right. It definitely is. And I think if I were to answer the question, what's the biggest difference in those for me, the answer would be that the kind of person I am, the solo podcast was challenging in that it's difficult to get going and to get motivation without feedback, right? So, and if you start and you do not get or reach to audience and you do not get feedback, it is really tough to keep going. And depending on your particular situation, there might be some other pressures and other things that compete for your time, and making a decision, or do I record a plan for the next episode or do something else? You might be more inclined to do something else, and podcast dies out. Whereas with co-hosting things, I think throughout our history, we played a role of support for one another when someone was on a downswing, kind of either emotionally or just energetically, if that's the right word. The other one would be there to maybe kind of carry a little bit more of a burden for a particular period of time, and it was and still is immensely helpful to make sure that the thing is going.
I agree. And I think in this regard, STRATsphere is more of a solo hosting thing. Even though there is a guest in every episode, it's still mostly up to me to carry things out. Yes, there is team helping me here, but the overall idea and the direction and all the things are really hard to delegate and to share. I really hope that one day it will expand if it grows. But so far, STRATsphere is much more challenging in terms of self-management, like getting myself organized and reaching out to people, because invitations are really tough, and getting rejections is tough when people are busy and it's not a priority or something. I haven't gotten many, but still, like, it's emotionally draining, and it takes time to recover after. Like, I had a person in mind for episode 6. This person rejected, and then it took me a week to reconsider my plans and reach out to someone else.
Yeah, I imagine that this is even, with the setup you have, it is even more difficult than traditional solo podcast, because if you do a solo podcast, there are by and large two entities, you and your audience, and that's its own thing. But then in your case, it is more complicated because it's you, your guest, and the audience. And maybe even if we stretch it a bit further, it can be your audience versus your guest's audience, if they're a public person as well. And I think one of the mistakes I think I made in my solo podcasting is that I tried to find and discuss topics and discuss them in a way that I thought would be interesting and maybe pleasing, entertaining for the audience, sort of neglecting my own kind of views. And instead, if I chose to just talk about what I'm passionate about or something like that, without regard, not to say without respect, but without regard to the audience, I think I would have been able to do that for longer, maybe even arguably with a better result. And I think in your case that also might be an item to consider, because I would imagine that trying to please both the audience at large and make sure that guests get out of the recording and kind of experience satisfied might be a heavy burden to carry.
That is fair. And if theoretically you were to launch another podcast, would you consider going for another co-hosted thing, guest interview kind of thing, or solo?
That is a great question, and I do have an answer for that. I think no, I would have an answer for a different question, which is nonetheless related. I'm not sure if at this day and age I would go specifically for something, but thinking about this, I would, if there was someone who would be interested in doing a podcast on a topic which I'm kind of passionate about with me, where my duties would be to show up, kind of be myself, be entertaining, and all kind of offer ideas and discussions. I think I would sort of love to do that, kind of low pressure on me kind of thing, like thing to be myself in a thing I'm passionate about. So I would give preference to that, but I would still not rule out maybe doing a solo thing, but I would definitely do it differently than I did it in my previous attempt.
Totally. I think I would rule out a solo thing because it's really challenging to engage the audiences, like people who don't know me, into a solo podcast. One thing that I enjoy about the guests, that they do bring fresh people and new ideas. It is very refreshing. Co-hosted things has different charm, and solo is scary because I have no idea how solo podcasts are advertised or promoted, because it seems not organic or not authentic or not very natural, and again, not my cup of tea.
And it's definitely a lot of work that it might seem doing a solo thing, no matter what it is, like the podcast, I think YouTube channel or something along those lines.
That's true. I think we have kind of discussed the future plans on STRATsphere. Like, it's going to be season 1 for 12 episodes, and then we'll see. What about Biweekly? What are the future plans for Biweekly?
To keep going.
That's quite a plan.
Yep, I think that we've been going for quite a long time. We're still going. I think, if I remember correctly, our last conversation, we're still enjoying the process and would like for it to keep going. I think one of the things that we discussed is that the guest episodes were not always great, or were not always coming out the way we expected them to go, and it's also challenging to find guests and kind of bring that chemistry about. So we probably would put that thing on hold for now and do the rotation of your topic, my topic, and our favorite book club episodes, where we get to bash on authors and then apologize and still say that their books are okay. I think that's the plan.
That's the thing I enjoy about Biweekly right now, that it is more of flow, and it's really hard to formulate, but unlike STRATsphere, where there are success metrics you have to reach and there is specific pressure here, you can just be yourself in Biweekly. And sometimes when I prepare for a show, especially it works with themes episodes. it's really interesting to re-listen some of the previous episodes. Plus, since I have an access to the Russian-speaking season, I can also dig deeper and see what was like 5 years ago. And man, that was a very different podcast.
Right. Yeah, well, we grow, we evolve. So I think that's to be expected.
But some things are the same. It's 2 hosts and biweekly title.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everything else has changed.
Right, yeah.
Maybe your microphone has been
Well,
there.
yeah, we've been using this microphones, or at least I've been using my microphone for ages now. I think you had to change your mic because of technical issue with the previous incarnation, but it's still essentially the same model of microphone.
And if there is someone who has been listening for a number of episodes, we would like you to tell us why. Just curious, what has been keeping you with Biweekly?
Right.
And a good place to go is our YouTube page. And in the comments below the video, it would be really nice to hear your stories, because it was quite a retrospective right now and comparing it to a new show that I'm running. But I'm still kind of interested in like who are those hundreds of people who listen to Biweekly and what keeps you here.
Yep. And with that, we are immensely grateful for those 100 or 100 plus people who are still listening to us. Thank you so much. It would be great to connect. As Slava said, come to YouTube. You can also come to our side, but that I guess a little bit old school at this day and age to leave comments on the site. It's been great talking to you today.
Yeah, hopefully next time is not going to take us a few months as this episode.
Right. And yeah, hopefully in 2 weeks there will be another episode with follow-ups and topics and stuff like that. Like all the usual goodies.
Yep. Sounds like a plan. Then see you there.
Yep. See you. Good weeks.
Good weeks.